Welcome back to the program. It's 15 minutes past the hour. I still have the Amnesty International Executive Director, Rongo Holton, and Professor Peter Kagwanja in studio. Welcome back, of course, to the discussion. This is Checkpoint right on KTN. And Rongo, earlier we've been talking about the new individual who's going to come in as the EACC CEO. Of course, that is after it's going to be vetted and approved by Parliament. And this individual comes from the military intelligence. You know, he's not the only one. The DPP is also from, you know, initially he was from the intelligence. It seems that all these appointments relate to individuals who come from the intelligence. I'm sure Prof is going to tell us whether this is a strategy or what from the government. I'm not saying you're going to speak on behalf of the government, but what is your reading towards
So I think first we have to recognize that actually the intelligence are beginning to seep into areas that were not necessarily intelligence areas. But in the case of corruption, these are areas where actually intelligence is quite important, and that you actually are able to pull together robust files that can achieve convictions. I think there are three areas of, I guess, advice, humbly, I would offer to the incoming, if the nomination goes through Parliament. The first is to immediately look at recruiting internal auditors, people who understand institutional graft and economic crimes, and expand that capacity within the AACC. The second is to avoid the training of an intelligence officer. You know, intelligence officers are second to ghosts. In fact, they like to operate like ghosts.
Interesting.
They don't use the media very well. They don't reach out to the public very well. So their capacity to harness the public for the investigations is quite weak. And we've seen this a little bit with the lifestyle audits. These were done largely in secret, and I suspect they will argue that it was for the reason that they wanted to protect the individuals that were going through lifestyle audits. But the problem is when you don't have public scrutiny, it is very possible for a program to start and stop without us knowing what has happened. So I think, and the other thing, of course, is that from our own research, when I was doing more work on this area, we used to find that for every economic crime, there were at least 10 people who knew that it had happened. But they were never asked, they were never encouraged to come forward, and they were never given the opportunity to blow the whistle. So I think, you know, the same way that any intelligent taxi officer, any intelligence taxi driver, or any border driver, or any tuk-tuk driver can tell you who owns which buildings in this city called Nairobi. We need to involve the public so the public can come forward and actually provide the intelligence that's needed. If you don't do this, you will lose maybe 80% of the capacity in this country to fight corruption. And the last thing, the very last thing, is that the EACC has a prevention role. And that involves having to deal with the issue of national ethics and the issue of national values. And I'm not seeing a strong, robust program that is actually beginning to challenge many of us on what we can call situational ethics. The ethics that involve, in my office, I behave this way. When I go home, I behave this way. But if I'm given the opportunity of being a tenderpreneur, I will do that as well. You know? So I think that's what we need to see beginning to happen in this country also.
And there's something interesting you've mentioned, prevention of corruption, because we always hear the war on corruption, fighting corruption. Little is being done on, you know, preventing this.
Let me give you an example. We know the sanctions in many cases. Unfortunately, the criminal justice system is not taking us to a point where we're seeing convictions, but we know the sanctions that are involved, and they can be quite heavy. What we don't have enough of is what are the incentives for good citizenship? I mean, it sounds crazy, but let me give you, it's called nudge theory, but let me give you some interesting things. If you pay your taxes on time, if you drive without a traffic offense, if you stop and help somebody who has been knocked down in the road, if you help a citizen that is homeless, there are no incentives for doing that. It is considered to just be good. Why don't we start offering people things like, for example, free parking in the city if you are found to have no traffic record for the last 5 years? If you pay your taxes on time, maybe you could get 10% back. Now, I guess what we don't have in this country is actually incentives for good citizenship, for ethical citizenship. And I think that could be an interesting area to start thinking about in terms of governance.
Interesting insights. Now, Prof, the issue of intelligence, you know, and how these new appointments have a link with intelligence. The DPP is from he has intelligence background, and the incoming CEO, once he's approved once again, he's from the military intelligence. Is this some sort of a strategy from the government?
I would say yes. It can't just happen by chance. It's deliberate. I've not asked them, but I don't need to be told.
Is it going to work?
First and foremost, to say that all these men And you can mention all of them, including the IG as intelligence background.
Yes.
Because area of corruption, for instance, and the level at which we have reached in the development of our capitalism require people who can go deep to get information. Otherwise, we'll be doing a lot of witch hunting. That's one. The other thing is that these people also have experience in other areas other than intelligence. They did not come straight from their job and then came here. Somebody like Twalib has even worked in Kenyan. He has been in corporate world, he has been in intelligence world, he has been outside the country in Germany as also. His CV is very impressive. But as a strategy, I would argue that the reason why the government is going this way is because we have reached a level where fighting corruption can be extremely dangerous for a civilian like myself. If corruption decides to fight back, it will come to my house. How am I going to defend myself? But these are systems people. You cannot fight them until you want to fight the system. And that is a message that is being sent out, and I think everybody is listening to it, that it has reached a certain level, that there are no holy cows.
Yes.
And that if there is a cost to it. My caution is simply this. The problem with intelligence, or using the intelligence methodology to deal with this kind of issue, is that intelligence and prosecutable evidence are two different things. That you might have a lot of intelligence on the table, but it might not go through the court.
Sustain a charge.
It cannot sustain a charge.
Yes.
So the challenge, and I think this is again what Irongo was talking about when you're talking about get people with capacity for financial auditing, for all this matter of, this is a crime. You understand the financial crime and so on. So that you do not only get the intelligence, but you back it up with the solid evidence that will get you through the courts. Yes. So the men, we call them the spooks. The men of that knowledge, I think was talking about the ghosts and so on. That spooky world, you need now to come out a little bit. And I think EACC is different from the others. DCIO cannot do a media campaign. Yeah. DPP, the moment he does campaign to a certain extent, he'll get a backlash because he's supposed to just do his work. But EACC has capacity to have programs that do what Irongo is talking about, involving the public, involving communication. But again, you don't go that way unless you have evidence, because you can victimize people.
Yes, we do hope the new incoming CEO is going to take notes from this conversation. Let's talk about the multi-agency task force. This is something we touched on earlier. It seems like the EACC are being, put aside as much as the DPP and DCI are working together. Now, Irongo, this is a story that was published on Wednesday on The Standard, an incident where police foiled an attempt by anti-graft investigators to arrest two detectives attached at Kabete Directorate Criminal Department. Apparently, these two individuals were arrested by anti-graft detectives, so they had to call in, some individuals from the DCI to come and, release them. So what does this say about the multi-agency sort of operation when we see openly EACC and officials from the DCI clashing?
So I think first thing is just to remind Kenyans what is the multi-agency task force. And this is a task force that was set up under the former Attorney General, Gideon Muigai. We worked very closely in my previous capacity when we were doing work on the Red Card campaign. And we tried very vigorously to try and raise the issue of integrity, leadership integrity, just prior to the elections. And the multi-agency task force essentially had all the different agencies related to corruption working together. I wouldn't jump to a conclusion that the multi-agency task force has either been ruptured or has collapsed as a result of this incident, because there are two possible scenarios that have happened. And I guess if you had the DCI here, he would be able to clarify exactly what was happening. But there could be two scenarios. One scenario is that you have individuals essentially being targeted for alleged crimes or vendetta. So that could be one scenario. And then the second one is the one that you're hinting that there could be tension between the DCI and the other agency. But I think for me, I would not jump to conclusions very quickly without understanding what's happening. I would simply demand that the different agencies continue to work together, because what we know is when they collaborate, we get convictions. We've seen this.
Yes.
Yeah,
Your view on the multi-agency?
the concept of multi-agency operation is fairly new in Kenya. And we've seen it working very well in Somalia, where our different sections of our military, the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force are coordinating. And you'd have suffered huge casualties if it were not this multi-agency. Two, the military as a whole, collaborating with the police force, the GSU, and the intelligence inside the country to deal with the terrorism. Again, a huge success for the idea of multi-agency. I think the concept of multi-agency is now getting to corruption, and this is where the rubber meets the road. It is where the rubber meets the road because you're also dealing with corrupt elements within these forces, and they have friends, and they will call, they make calls, and therefore I would call these hiccups or hazards of business that Yusuf is corrupt and Professor Kagwanja is corrupt, and Yusuf knows Kagwanja, and Kagwanja knows, and I am media, DCI, you are in the police, then you call me, I come to your help. But that is not to say that the multi-agency notion is ruptured. I think what we need to do is to, again, begin to think about how do we do to, what do we begin to do to rein in the guards. This is a Roman question. Who is going to guard the guardians? You know, because if the guardians are corrupt, what do you deal with them? So I think the concept of multi-agency, operation is hugely important. It is our future, but again, we need to deal with rogue elements within our forces across the board. Yeah, we need to deal with our rogue elements.
Once again, these are issues the incoming CEO might work on because the perception out there is that EACC has been singled out while the DCI and the DPP have been working together, not just hand in hand, what some media circles say hand in glove. They've been really working together. So as we conclude this discussion, I'm sure corruption is a very big topic. We cannot finish it within this program. But as we conclude, let's talk about the political will out there. And we've seen the president out there openly reprimanding some of his cabinet secretary, to be specific, the agriculture CS, over non-payment of farmers. So as much as we're seeing a very angry president, so many people are saying, why are we not seeing proper action following?
So I think the political will for me is in two levels. There's the executive and there's the parliament. I think, coming first of all to your question, which is the executive, I think anger doesn't convict people. What it does is creates a sense of urgency, but actually what is needed is clear-headed strategy that gives those people who are on the front line of this war, essentially the agencies we've been speaking about, gives them the latitude to pursue this to the final conclusion and give them political protection that they are actually doing the work of the executive. The area that I would like to turn to a little bit is the parliament. Now, we know that the Anti-Corruption and I think it's the Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Act was mutilated by the 10th or the 11th Parliament, I believe, to a point that actually it has really very little teeth to be able to fight corruption. Now, we have heard from the DPP that he plans to petition for an amendment to the economic crimes, to the Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Act. And I think what would be very important is to see parliamentarians showing up to provide support for those amendments. The second point, third point now is on Tuesday there is a very important judgment that will be delivered by the High Court. And it will be delivered in respect to a petition, again by the Director of Public Prosecutions, with regards to what happens to state officers when they are prosecuted. Should they continue to continue in office? Should they continue to have full benefits and salaries, or should they be asked to step aside for the duration of the case?
Yes.
And I think these two moments will really demonstrate whether there is political will in this country. I think legal and political will, first from the parliament, but also from the judiciary.
Let me give the Prof the last word here. And it's good to mention that even those who are stepping aside at the moment are still being given half their salary. So the people out there who are saying they should not be paid, they should not be paid altogether. A very interesting comment there from the public. Prof, your last word as we conclude this discussion.
Political responsibility lies with the president. That's why we have one center of accountability. The president should take it that he's alone in this fight and should fight as if he's alone with the people who are supporting him. Politicization and instrumentalization, or turning anti-corruption into an instrument, is becoming vivid. people need money for campaign. People need to build the war chests for 2022. So we're going to find a lot of these things happening around. But it is his legacy that will be at stake. Because if this country does not go through and become a clean country, the burden will be on him. His legacy is the one to be eroded. So that is really political accountability, and a political will is not a choice for him. He has no choice. Others may have choice because of their ambitions. Second, I think the institutions that are chosen to do the work are using hard power. This is the administration and so on. Irungu says political will is about government. Us as Kenyans, as individuals, wherever we are, we have political and social responsibility to create an accountable society where you'll stand before your son and your daughter and say, Mommy, I have no problem. As I leave this world, I don't leave you with any moral burden. You can go to any compound and nobody will point a finger at. How many Kenyans can do that? So we need again to also be account to ourselves before we point to the politicians. What are we doing as civilians?
Professor Peter Kagwanja, many thanks for your input as call on international relations and political science, as well as Mr. Irungu Houghton. Always a pleasure to have you here. He's the Executive Director, Amnesty International. And that brings us to the end of our discussion tonight. Many thanks for staying with us. But the show continues. We still have a lot lined up for you, and we have some good news for Arsenal fans out there. Stay with us.